Hey, yeah, you watching this. Before we get into the dark, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you tuning in from? And what time is it for you right now? I always wonder who else is awake at these hours, when the old things stir. And if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe. You'll need these stories where you're going. All right, let's begin. I was 17 when I first heard the story. An old priest, skin like parchment, eyes like wet ash, pulled me aside after confession. Not for any sin I'd admitted, but because, he claimed, I looked like someone who listens, someone who wouldn't run. It was a humid August evening, Paris slick with the sweat of dying summer. Notre-Dame loomed over the Seine, its stones the color of old teeth, its spires bleeding into the violet dusk. I wasn't supposed to be out after dark, but the priest's voice had the kind of gravity that bends your will, whether you believe or not. The hunchback wasn't born, he told me, voice cracking like old vellum. He was left. Left? I thought he meant abandoned. But no, he meant bound, buried, kept. You know the story they tell. A deformed bell ringer hidden away in the belfry, his face a horror, his heart pure. It's a lie. A beautiful, convenient lie. The truth is older. Older than Quasimodo, older than Hugo's ink, older than the stones of the cathedral itself. When Notre-Dame was first raised from the blood-soaked earth of medieval Paris, before the flying buttresses, before the gargoyles grinned down at the streets, there were things already beneath it. The priests knew, the masons whispered. And when a child was born wrong, misshapen, monstrous, they believed it a sign, not a punishment, but gift. They called him Alderic. The name doesn't exist in any official record. It wouldn't. But the word crops up in marginalia, scrawled into forgotten ledgers, carved into the underside of old bells. Alderic vincit, Alderic triumphs. They kept him in a chamber below the cathedral, deep in the crypts. A child with a body like melted wax, eyes too large and bright in the dark. His voice could split the ears of men. They said, could shatter glass when he cried. But when he sang, the stones hummed. The bells rang by themselves. They fed him scraps. They prayed to him when the plague came, when war marched through Paris, when the river ran red with the blood of heretics. Alderic was their secret weapon, their sacred abomination. And for a time, it worked. The city survived. But even monsters tire. The old priest told me how, in the year 1231, the last surviving masons and clergy who'd first sealed Alderic away grew afraid. The boy had stopped aging, his flesh turned waxen, his hair like brittle white. Brits. And worse, the bells began to ring without cause. At midnight, at the hour of deaths, no one could have predicted. So they tried to kill him, sealed him inside the bell itself, the great 10th bell, forged from the gold of executed heretics, hidden far beneath the cathedral. And then they forgot, or tried to. But old stones remember, and old blood calls. I left the confessional that night with the priest's words thick in my throat. His final warning still sears my memory. "The bells, boy," he whispered. "When they toll alone, someone's coming home." And that was just the beginning. The Bells of Blood, a Notre-Dame Horror Tale. There's a sound Paris makes at night, a hush that presses against the skin like a damp cloth, made of rain on slate roofs, the scuttle of rats in alleyways, and the far-off, hollow sob of church bells no one claims to have rung. In 1452, Notre-Dame had begun to sink, not in the way a house gives way to age, but as if the earth beneath her had begun to swallow. Cracks opened in the chapels. Stones wept moisture. The gargoyles' faces twisted in ways the original masons hadn't carved. That year, my Uncle Matthew, a bell ringer for the night watch, vanished. Not one of the city guards cared. In those days, if you worked in the towers, it was assumed you'd either go mad or jump. But I did care. He was my blood, and I knew he'd never leave his post without reason. The next night, I went to find him. The cathedral after dark isn't the same place as it is by day. By daylight, it's a vault of air and light, the sun catching motes of dust that dance like tiny spirits. But when the lamps are doused and the faithful gone, it's a hollow thing, a skeleton of stone, each rib a rib of the earth's own making. I moved through the nave, past the altar, where the statue of the Virgin seemed to watch, her eyes clouded in shadow, the scent of cold wax, damp stone. An old incense clung to the air. I found the staircase behind the sacristy, the spiral that wound up to the belfry, each step slick with old moss. I remember pausing halfway because I felt it, a warmth, as though something had just passed me on the stairs. Except no one was there. And then, the first sound. A voice. Not a voice I knew. Not my uncle's. A child's. High, clear, and impossibly soft, echoing from above. "Do you hear it?" The words weren't French. Older. A kind of Latin I recognized from old church hymns. And then, a toll. The great bell, and no one was supposed to be in the tower. At the belfry, the doors hung open. Inside, ropes swayed, though no hands held them. The bells hung still, but one quivered. And in the corner of the room, a mark had been sprawled on the wall, in something dark. Not ink, not paint, a sigil of twisted lines, the old name beneath it, Alderic. Then a voice spoke behind me. They left me. I turned. There, in the shadowed corner, something moved. A shape, hunched, its skin the color of candle wax, hair like ash. But it wasn't the face that rooted me to the floor. It was the eyes, pale, milky white, like clouded pearls, yet alive, burning with something ancient and endless. It reached a long, thin hand toward me. "One more," it whispered. "Then the bells will sing again." I ran. I don't remember how I reached the bottom of the stairs, or how I made it to the street. Only that when I burst into the open air, the night felt heavier. like something old had shifted. Notre-Dame's bell tolled once more behind me, and Paris, in the distance, went still. They found my uncle's body 2 days later, folded into a crypt beneath the cathedral, beneath even the known catacombs, his face frozen in a rictus of terror, his tongue removed and scratched into the stone above his corpse. A warning. One by one, blood by bell, the hunger below. After what happened in the belfry, I tried to leave Paris, packed a bag, sold what little I had, but the city didn't let me. Every time I reached the gates, a sudden storm would roll in, or a bridge would collapse, or a stranger's hand would fall on my shoulder and say something like, "You'll be needed soon." And always, always, the sound of that bell. It rang when no one pulled the rope, at hours when no mass was held. At times, even the priests swore the ropes were locked. It wasn't a sound of mourning or of time marked. It was a summons. And it wasn't just me who heard it. Word spread in hushed tones through the streets. Children saw a pale figure limping through alleyways at night. Merchants whispered of coins turning to teeth in their purses. A fishmonger claimed to have found an ancient, withered hand in the bell tower's rain barrel. And in the graveyard behind Notre-Dame, the earth shifted. I saw it myself. A mound, fresh turned, though no burial had been done for weeks. A flicker of something pale, wriggling just beneath the soil. I didn't run this time. Instead, I found Father Berard, the oldest priest in Paris. A man so ancient his face looked carved from wax, his voice a rasp of parchment. When I told him what I'd seen, his face grew gray. "Alderic," he said. A name I thought was just a word scrawled on stone, but he knew it. We sat in the cathedral's crypt by candlelight, surrounded by tombs, older than France itself. Alderic, he whispered, was no ghost. She was a daughter of the bellmaker, born twisted, hunched, feared. The bishop declared her unholy. The people, they walled her alive beneath the cathedral, inside one of the foundation pillars. It was said she spoke to the stones, and that the bells tolled themselves when she wept. I asked how long ago this was. 200 years, he murmured. 2 centuries, and yet the earth still shifted when her name was spoken. The bells still answered. She never left. That night, the city shook. A quake, the likes of which had not touched Paris in 100 years. The bell tower groaned. Windows cracked. And from the crypt, a sound rose. Not a bell, not a human cry, but the clatter of 100 tiny bones. I followed it, down through the ossuaries, past the bones of plague victims, past altars smeared with long-dried blood. And I saw it, a doorway, bricked over, with a mark above it, a crude bell shape, the stone blackened by fire. And beneath it, a single word, carved deep. Alderic. The bricks crumbled at my touch. Inside, a chamber, not empty. At its center, a shape hunched over a cradle made of bones. Its back to me, white hair hanging in ropes. The scent of earth and death so thick it clung to the lungs. And as I stepped forward, it spoke. They will toll, all of them, one by one. The cradle shifted, and something inside it moved. Not a child, not entirely. Something older, something with too many limbs. The creature turned its head, and those same pearl-pale eyes fixed on mine. And behind me, the bells began to ring. The widow's ledger. When the bells stopped ringing, Paris held its breath. For the first time in centuries, no one dared enter the cathedral. Notre-Dame, a sanctuary for sinners, merchants, kings, now stood as silent as a mausoleum. Even the beggars crossed themselves and slept far from the river. I stayed. Foolish, perhaps, but when you've looked horror in its pale, glassy eyes, when you've seen a creature that should not breathe, still clutching bone, like a mother cradling a child, you realize that running buys you nothing. The dead have no borders. ... I took refuge in the cathedral's old treasury, a room built in the reign of Charles VI, lined with rusted chests and forgotten relics. And there I found her ledger, a book so ancient the leather binding wept when touched. Its pages written in a language older than Latin, margins scrawled with faces, not drawn, but pressed into the parchment, as though the skin itself remembered. I turned the pages with trembling hands, and then one name, Alderic, written not once, but dozens of times. Each date beside it marked the death of a bell ringer, names crossed out, smeared in what looked like old blood. 1282, 1309, 1367, 1401. Centuries of disappearances, always the bell ringers, always their bodies vanished, no burial, no last rites, and beside each, the same crude bell shape, a curse, a ledger of sacrifice. But then the final page, my name, written in ink so fresh it bled when I touched it. A date. Tonight. I staggered from the treasury, heart hammering, cold sweat slicking my back, and the air in Notre-Dame, it hummed. A vibration you can feel in your teeth. The scent of damp stone and ancient decay thickening. I wasn't alone. At the far end of the nave, a woman stood, or what wore the shape of one. Pale, brittle, hair like faded cobwebs, her face thin as parchment, stretched over bone, eyes milky with centuries. But it wasn't her that made my blood ice. It was what moved behind her. A host of them, shapes that flickered where no light shone. The forgotten bell ringers, their faces stitched from wax and ruin, their mouths sewn shut, all tethered to her by ropes of hair and sinew. And in her hand, a rope, a bell rope. Alderic smiled, a slit of dry lips, teeth like yellowed pearls. The city has forgotten, she rasped, but I have not. And as she spoke, I felt it. The stones of the cathedral thrumming like a living thing. This wasn't a curse born of supers. Superstition. This was old blood magic. woven into the mortar, paid for with marrow and iron. The bells were not to call the faithful. They were to keep something asleep. And now they would toll one final time. When the bells toll, the first bell struck midnight. A hollow, warbling tone, too slow, too deep, too old. I swear the very air thickened, pressing against my skin like damp wool. The timbers of the cathedral groaned. I knew it wasn't a sound meant for the living, and yet it rang. The bell tower, so long sealed, its stairs crumbled, its ropes rotted, should have remained silent. But something climbed those steps now. I ran, not from fear, not then. I wanted to reach it first, to stop the ringing. The old stairwell spiraled in endless coils, each step slick with centuries of mildew and forgotten blood. My lantern flickered, casting warped shadows along the stones. As I climbed, I could feel them, the tethered dead, the bell ringers who never left. Faint echoes of chains, the scuff of bare, broken feet on stone, a sour, ancient breath against my ear. "Join us," a voice rasped. Too close. But when I turned, nothing but the twisting darkness. I reached the belfry just as the second bell struck. Boom! A deafening shudder. The great bell blackened with soot, swinging of its own accord. The rope moved like a thing alive, and there, pulling it, was Alderic. Her face half-rotted now, hair floating weightless in the damp air. She grinned. Every city forgets, but their bones remain. I backed against the wall, and then, in the streets below, it began. Windows rattled, the river churned black as pitch, and from the graveyards of old Paris, bones stirred. The forgotten dead clawed their way free, mouths stitched shut, eyes sunken, bell ropes looped around their necks. Not ghosts, corpses. I watched as they poured from hidden crypts, from sealed plague pits beneath old churches, from the catacombs where no light had touched for centuries. Paris was waking its dead, and Alderic's curse reached beyond Notre-Dame. Those long-forgotten bell ringers, dragged to their deaths to keep some ancient horror buried, were now loose. But not alone. The tolling of the bell was a signal, not to the dead, but to what lived beneath them. From the shadows beneath the cathedral's foundation, something stirred. A sound like the scraping of stone jaws, a dragging mass of limbs, the thing the bells were built to imprison. The ground cracked, tiles split, the ancient crypt split open, and something older than language moved. I couldn't see it, not fully, only a suggestion of size, of unclean hunger. A hand as long as a man's height, skinless and wet, teeth like rusted nails, eyes that wept a thick, black ichor. Alderic's voice rose in a chant. Words I didn't understand, but the stones did, and so did the dead. I had to stop her, or Paris would drown in its own history. The thing beneath the stones. I didn't know how long I'd been in the bell tower. Seconds, hours, time had no meaning anymore. Only the tolling, the rising wail of the dead. I stumbled back down the winding stairs, my feet slipping in something dark and slick. Below, the cathedral's nave was no longer empty. The dead had come. Silent figures moved between the pews, their bell ropes trailing behind them like the strings of marionettes. Their skin waxy, their eyes hollow and sunken. Not ghosts, bodies, stitched and pressed by time. The forgotten poor, the plague victims, the ancient criminals walled up alive. And every step they took, every creaking of ancient joints, sounded in perfect rhythm with the bell. Boom! A step. Boom! But another. It was a funeral procession for a city still breathing. And at their head, Alderic, no longer even remotely human. Her face was a ruined tapestry of torn flesh and bone. Her eyes, hollow pits. She carried the great chain that once bound the thing beneath the cathedral. And behind her, it came. I wish I could tell you it had a shape, a face, a name. But it was nothing so kind. A thing built from sin and blood memory. The collected violence of Paris. Every innocent starved. Every child abandoned in the catacombs. Every riot. Every execution. Stitched into a single horror. It moved like wet smoke. Its limbs bending wrong. Its teeth everywhere and nowhere at once. And it was hungry. I knew what Alderic wanted. She wasn't raising an army. She was raising a city's memory. To drown Paris in its own past. The bells would toll, and the dead would wake, and the thing would see. Swallow the light. The bones of the forgotten would rule again. I ran, through the collapsing nave, past ancient saints cracking from the walls, past stained glass that now showed images too foul to name. I reached the crypt door. It had been sealed for centuries, bricked up by men who knew its secrets. And I, idiot that I was, broke it open. Because every horror story needs a fool. I descended, past old bones stacked like cordwood, past forgotten saints and graven warnings. The air was thick, clotted, a coppery tang that stuck to the back of my throat. And the closer I came, the louder the bells. Not the great one overhead, but smaller ones, burial bells. The kind tied to corpses' fingers in case they woke underground. Ting, ting, ting. Dozens of them, hundreds, ringing in the dark. And then I saw them. Not men, not women, but the city's first bell ringers, the ones who paid for the old magic in blood. Chained, blind, half mummified, their lips sewn shut. Yet their eyes screamed. Still, ringing their little bells with bone-thin fingers. Not to be saved, but to warn. And behind them, the pit, a black, gaping maw in the earth. From it rose a mist, thick, red as old wine, and from within it moved, a face too vast to be seen at once, eyes that bled ink, a jaw of shattered teeth, Alderic's final offering. Come forth, memory of blood. I was too late, and in that moment, as the last bell struck, I realized what Paris truly was. Not a city, a tomb, and the dead had waited long enough. The city that remembered. The pit split wider. I should have run. Every instinct, every sane voice inside me begged it. But something held me there. Something older than fear. A voice, not spoken, not heard, but felt. Stay. Alderic's form stood at the edge of the pit, arms outstretched, her skin like burned parchment clinging to bone. The chain she carried slithered down into the darkness like a serpent eager to feed. And from that fathomless blackness, it rose. Not a beast, not a man. A memory made flesh. A cathedral's worth of sins given weight and shape. Its limbs were stitched from fog and centuries of whispered curses. Eyes like drowned coins, a maw too wide, filled with teeth shaped from shattered gravestones. It looked at me, and somewhere in the back of my skull, I felt a name, a word older than the city itself. Van de Graust, the ancient eater of cities, the thing buried beneath Notre-Dame long before the first stone was laid, before Paris was Paris. The bells had always been meant to bind it, each one cast with blood, each ringer doomed to die sealing it beneath. But now the last bell had rung. Alderic had freed it. The city above boiled in chaos. The dead marched, the river ran red, and the great cathedral itself groaned as if alive. I fled the crypt, the stones slick with blood and rain, through the nave where the corpses danced, through the shattered door where the streets churned with ash and bone. I ran to the bell tower, one last desperate plan forming. If I could sever the last rope, the great bell's final tether, perhaps it would bind the thing again. Perhaps the bloodline curse could be snapped. Perhaps. But when I reached the tower, it was waiting. Alderic, what was left of her. We built this city on blood. Her voice 1,000 voices. I raised the old axe I'd found in the vestry. The bell's rope, thick and sodden, swayed before me. Each swing a heartbeat. I hesitated, because to sever the bond was to die. That was the rule. The bell ringer always died. She stepped closer. That ruin of a face, almost pitying. You carry it too now. You always did. And then, the thing surged from the crypt, its misty limbs seeping through the walls. The bells screamed. I swung. The axe bit through the rope. A silence like drowning. The mist recoiled. The dead froze. The creature, half risen, howled a sound that cracked stone and sent statues crumbling. And then it was gone, pulled back into the pit, the stones sealed, the crypt walls knitted closed. Alderic crumbled to dust, and I felt the weight settle in my bones. The mark of the bell ringer, the curse passed on. Paris awoke. The dead lay as bones once more. The cathedral stood, though its stones wept red, and the bells silent. But in the corners of the city, in the old graveyards, in the empty alleys, the faint, sorrowful sound of a bell lingered. A reminder, the dead never forget, and neither does the city. And somewhere beneath those stones, Vandegroust waits for the next bell.